Our first session, let's get going, is entitled Open Your Mind. In this session, you will meet and hear from two extraordinary game changers, and part one of our Great Influencers series will be on Wall Street. That is section one, so open your mind as to how we now, across the world, might address a different, a more robust strategy for economic development. Imagine that a person and a group could provide the framework for thinking, acting, and measuring such a breakthrough. Let's start by bringing to the stage an individual who's created a concept called the Social Progress Index that he says will make us think and measure economic development differently. Please welcome to the stage Michael Green. Michael.
It's a great pleasure to be here with you today. And I have to say that Naples, Florida, and this event is going to live in my memory forever. Because yesterday my wife and I celebrated our first wedding anniversary, and we got to celebrate it here. So if you see my wife Sasha, she's around somewhere. And she's also got our son Peter with her. So that's the baby, is our son Peter. So do say hello. He's very friendly and he loves to meet people. On the 4th of January, 1934, a young man presented a report to the United States Congress that, more than 80 years on, still shapes the lives of everyone in this room today. Still shapes the lives of everyone on this planet. That young man wasn't a politician, he wasn't a businessman, he wasn't a civil rights activist or a faith leader. He was that most unlikely of heroes, an economist. His name was Simon Kuznets, and the report that he presented was titled National Income 1929 to 1932. Now, you might look at this and think that this report is rather boring. Well, I've read it, and it is very boring. But this report is the foundation of how today we measure the success of our societies, the system of national income accounting that we know best as gross domestic product, or GDP. GDP has defined and shaped our world for the last 80 years. And today, I want to talk about a different way to measure the success of our societies, to define and shape our world for the next 80 years. But first, we have to understand why Kuznets' innovation was so successful. It came, of course, at a critical moment as the US economy was plummeting into the Great Depression. And policymakers simply didn't know what was going on. They lacked good quality statistics about how the economy was performing. And without good statistics, they couldn't figure out the right policies. What Kuznets' report gave them was those reliable numbers about how the US economy was performing, what it was producing, that allowed them eventually to come up with the solutions that pulled the US economy out of the slump. Kuznets' innovation had proved its usefulness, and that's why it's spread around the world. And today, every country produces GDP statistics on a quarterly basis. You'd think that Kuznets would have been proud of this, but he wasn't. Because in that first report, in the introduction, on page 7, he issued a warning. He wrote, "The welfare of a nation can therefore scarcely be inferred from a measurement of national income as defined above." Now, it's not the greatest soundbite. He was an economist, remember. But the message is clear. GDP, national income accounting, is a tool to help us manage the economy, he tells us. It's not a way to measure the performance of our societies. But we've ignored his warning. Trillions of dollars of capital move across borders based on whether GDP is going up or going down. Our politicians campaign on whether they've produced more economic growth or whether their opponent has produced not enough. We live in a world dominated by GDP. But we know that GDP is flawed. GDP counts bombs and prisons as progress. GDP is blind to the environment. GDP has nothing to say about fairness or justice. And GDP is deaf to issues of friendship or community. Is it any surprise that a world marching to the drumbeat of GDP is at risk of environmental destruction and seething with such anger. I believe that we are ready for a measurement revolution, a different way to measure the success of our societies. We're ready because the financial crisis of 2008 showed us that our current ways of measuring success were just showing phantom, mirage progress. We're ready because the Arab Spring of 2010 showed us that countries that were supposed to be economic superstars, like Tunisia, were in fact societies crumbling from within. We're ready because we see the way that our traditional heuristics of economic policy are failing and that people are feeling left behind and angry. And we're ready because we can measure and define statistics in ways that would have been unimaginable in Kuznets' day. Today, I'd like to introduce to you the Social Progress Index. It's a whole new way of looking at our societies. It's a measure not based on economic proxies, but the real things that matter to real people. The Social Progress Index asks three basic questions about a society. First, does everyone have the basic needs of survival? Food, water, shelter, safety. Secondly, does everyone have the building blocks of a better life? Education, information, health, and a good quality environment. And finally, can everyone in our society pursue their hopes and dreams without impediments, with rights, freedom of choice, freedom from discrimination, and access to the world's most advanced knowledge? Together, these 12 components make up the Social Progress Index. And for each of these components, we find indicators to measure not effort, but achievement. We don't measure how much a country spends on healthcare. We measure the length and quality of people's lives. We don't measure whether laws are passed against discrimination. We measure whether people experience discrimination. So, let me show you what we found from our 2016 index results. And I'm going to show you on this chart. So here we've got social progress on the vertical axis. Higher is better. And then, just for fun, just for comparison, on the horizontal axis is GDP per capita. Further to the right, more GDP. And the country in the world with the highest social progress in 2016 was Finland. And the country in the world with the lowest social progress was, sadly, Central African Republic. So, you're smart people, and what you will have spotted is that, of course, Finland has a much higher GDP per capita than Central African Republic. It's a good point, well made. But look at these two countries. Here's Malawi. Malawi has a very similar GDP to Central African Republic, but a much higher level of social progress. And here's the United States. It's got a significantly higher GDP than Finland, but a lower level of social progress. So what's going on? Well, let me show you a few more countries first. The highest performing G7 country is actually Canada. My country, the United Kingdom, does pretty well. It's second amongst the G7. But much more importantly, we beat the French. It matters. Of the emerging economies, the BRICS, actually Brazil came out top of the BRICS, then South Africa, then Russia, then China, and then India. So those are some of the major countries in the world. What I'll do now is put in dots representing all the countries we've been able to measure, 133 countries so far. And then through this data, I'm just going to put in the regression line to show the average relationship between GDP and social progress. Here it comes. Now, what this shows us, I think, is three things. First of all, GDP is not terrible. On the whole, you get more GDP, you get more social progress in general terms, especially if you're a poorer country. See how sharp the curve is for poorer countries. And that kind of makes sense. If you want to develop as a country, you've got to get some resources to invest in roads and nurses and teachers, etc. That matters. Economic development can be a big driver of social progress. But what we also see is the way that this curve flattens out. that as you get richer, it gets harder to squeeze social progress out of your GDP. It's harder sometimes because, of course, as you get richer, you get new problems related to your wealth. Those could be environmental problems, or it could be problems like obesity. The other critical thing to notice about this data is the way that there's plenty of noise around this trend line. And what this shows us, in simple terms, is that GDP is not destiny. If you're planning your country's development solely based on getting more GDP, you only have half a plan. At every level of GDP, there are opportunities for more social progress and risks of less. There are countries like Kuwait, the highest GDP country in our sample, that really is not turning its wealth into social progress very efficiently. Or there are countries like Costa Rica, you'll see just above Brazil. Here's a country with a pretty modest wealth, but achieving a level of social progress similar to that of Western European countries. It's really efficient at turning its wealth into social progress for its citizens. And in a way, what we need is more countries to be following this type of approach, understanding how to get social progress, real well-being for its citizens from its wealth. Now let's take a bit of a deeper dive into what the Social Progress Index says about the United States. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to look at the United States compared to other countries of similar GDP. This is a bit like in boxing. We're going to compare a heavyweight with other heavyweights, not with a flyweight or a lightweight. So what we're going to do is just take a method where we take 15 countries, the 15 countries closest to the US in terms of GDP. For those countries, we take the median score for each of the indicators, and then we'll see whether the US is performing significantly better or significantly worse than that peer group. Okay? And now I'm going to put it all together on this scorecard. Now, there's a lot of data here, and I'll walk you through it. But your first impression is that you will see a lot of red. Red is not good. Let me show you what it means. If you look at the top left-hand corner of this scorecard, you'll see that the US is actually 8th in the world on GDP per capita from our sample, but only 19th on social progress. So the US social progress score is significantly lower than it should be for a country of this wealth. And that is a distinction that the US is the only major industrial economy that shows that performance. It's a really, really striking finding. The US is not delivering social progress out of its GDP in aggregate terms. And what we can then do is break this down and look at the 12 components and see where the weakness lies. And I think as we look at it, you're not going to be surprised. Personal safety is an area of weakness. Not just homicide rate, but also road traffic accidents. The school system, problems in the school system, access to basic knowledge. Health and wellness. The US is only 69th in the world on health and wellness, despite spending more per capita than any other country in the world. The environment is at risk. Even personal rights are not as good as other peer countries. It's a very, very striking pattern of underperformance. Now, when I present this, I often get attacked from both sides. Some people say, well, yeah, social progress, it's a classic liberal conspiracy, this is anti-business. And the point I always make to them is, well, the chairman of our advisory board is Professor Michael Porter from Harvard Business School, the world's most cited writer on economics and business, the guru on competitiveness. So if he is an anti-business liberal, I'd be very surprised. Sometimes we also get attacked by saying, well, this seems very negative. Are you attacking particular political parties or particular administrations? And I say no, because what this data shows us is not the policy of one administration or the other. It's showing a pattern of decades of the failure to find solutions to invest adequately or effectively in the real things that matter to ordinary American citizens. This is real data that shows the size of the problems the United States faces. Now, one of the challenges in measuring the United States, of course, is that it's a big place and it's highly varied. But that's not necessarily a problem, because one of the strengths of the Social Progress Index is we don't have to just measure countries, we can actually measure any community we like. In fact, we've already developed a Social Progress Index for the European Union. for different regions of the European Union. And this is now being used by the European Union to plan their cohesion policy for the 28 countries. We've also measured cities. This is our social progress map of Bogota in Colombia. We've got a whole number of cities in Latin America now using the Social Progress Index to plan their development strategies. We can also do rural areas. We've done a Social Progress Index for 772 municipalities in the Amazon region of Brazil. That's pretty remote, but we can still measure those communities. And indeed, in one municipality, a place called Caruarí, which is right up in the Amazon, 2 days to get there by boat, we've even been able to go in and measure specific communities within that municipality. The Social Progress Index is a flexible tool that can be applied to any country, region, state, city, district, community. And that's why the next project we're working on is now a Social Progress Index for the United States. And this is called the Imagine Solutions Conference. So imagine if we could get a detailed social progress map for the states of the US, or maybe for the counties, or maybe for even more granular areas. If we can get this data, what could we do with it? There's the old saying, of course, that we manage what we measure. And we believe that if we can measure the progress of our societies rigorously in terms of the real things that matter to real people, we can build new collaborations, new efforts that can more effectively deliver improvements that will lead to real improvements in people's lives. Please, join us. Thank you.